Transmission is vital to the introduction received in Dzogchen, and the direct introduction I received from Chantruk Dorje that day, and continue to receive throughout my stay with him, was typical of the way in which transmission of the Dzogchen teachings has been passed on down the lineage from master to disciple, from the time of Garab Dorje, the first master of Dzogchen, who himself received transmission through direct visionary contact with the Sambhogakaya. Although centuries before the time of Garab Dorje, a simpler and less sophisticated form of the Dzogchen teachings had been introduced into many streams of the Bön tradition by Sherab Muyu, the great reformer of Bön, nevertheless, what we now know as the three series of Dzogchen teachings were taught for the first time on this planet in this time cycle by Garab Dorje, and although the great master Padmasambhava, who came later, is undoubtedly more widely known, it was from Garab Dorje that he received transmission, both directly in the form of a visionary transmission across time and space, and in the usual way, as the teachings had descended down the lineage of Garab Dorje's disciples and their disciples in turn. Garab Dorje was a totally realized being who manifested a birth in a Nirmanakaya form as a human being in the 3rd century BCE in the country of Ogyen, which was situated to the northwest of India. He spent his life there teaching to both human beings and the Dakinis. His final teaching before he entered the body of light was to summarize the teachings in 3 principles, sometimes known as the 3 last statements of Garab Dorje. The life of Garab Dorje. Garab Dorje, unlike Buddha Shakyamuni, who lived before his time, but like Padmasambhava, who was to come later, did not manifest an ordinary birth. A realized being can choose the manner, time and place of his or her birth in a way that seems impossible from the limited point of view of dualistic vision. Garab Dorje's mother, Sudama, was the daughter of the king of Ogyen, and she was a nun. The child she bore was conceived after a meditative vision, an event that both delighted and baffled her. She was ashamed and afraid that people would think badly of her or believe that the child was a phantom because he had been born to a virgin. So she hid him in a cinder pit. But when, a few days later, she returned full of remorse to look for the child, she found him radiant and healthy, playing in the ashes where she had left him. It was then accepted by the court that the child was a miraculous incarnation of a great teacher, and he was brought up in the king's palace. Spontaneously and untaught, out of his great clarity, he began to recite essential tantras, as if from memory, and the king found such joy in his company that he named him Prahasha Vajra, which means joyous Vajra in the language of Ogyen, a language similar to Sanskrit. In Tibetan, the name becomes Garab Dorje. At the age of 7, when all the learned pundits of the kingdom were gathered in debate, Garab Dorje defeated them in argument, showing far greater understanding than any of them. He then taught them the Dzogchen teachings, and the news rapidly spread far afield that a young boy considered to be the reincarnation of a great being living in the country of Ogyen was giving a teaching beyond the law of cause and effect. When the news reached India, it greatly disturbed the Buddhist pundits there, and it was decided that the most learned pundit of all, whose name was Manju Srimita, and who was extremely skilled in logic and argument, should lead a party to defeat this impudent young upstart in debate. But when Manju Srimita arrived, he found that the boy was indeed a great teacher and that he could not fault his teaching. it became clear to him that the child's realization went well beyond his own intellectual understanding. He then became deeply repentant and confessed to Garab Dorje the wrong motivation he had had in coming to see him, with the sole intention of debating with him and defeating him in argument. Garab Dorje forgave him and proceeded to give him more teaching. What he did ask of Manjushri Mitra, however, was that he, the greatest of all the Buddhist scholars of his time, should write a text setting out the argument of the teaching with which Garab Dorje had defeated him. The text that Manjushri Mitra then wrote exists to the present day. To understand in what sense the teaching of Garab Dorje can be said to be beyond the fundamental law of karma, the law of cause and effect, and thus apparently contradictory to the teachings of the Buddha, and yet nevertheless still be a perfect teaching, we must consider the famous Heart Sutra, the essential summary of the vast Prajnaparamita Sutras. This sutra proclaims the teaching on the nature of shunyata, voidness or emptiness of self-nature, the absence of inherent, independent existence, posited by Buddhism. Listing all the constituent elements with which we construct our reality, and stating that each in turn is void or empty of self-nature. Thus, the sutra expounds the voidness of the sense functions and their objects, repeating the formula, and so, because all phenomena are in essence void of self-nature, the I cannot be said to have any independent existence. And similarly, there is in reality no such thing as an ear or a nose, nor a faculty of seeing, nor of hearing, nor of smelling, and so on. Then the text negates in the same way the supposed self-existence of all central elements of the Buddha's teachings, with a view to showing their essential voidness, including in this list of negations the statement that there is no karma, no law of cause and effect. Since it is recorded in the sutra that the great Bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara was requested by the Buddha himself to give this teaching to the great Arhat Shariputra in front of an assembled multitude of all kinds of beings, and since at the end of the sutra the Buddha greatly praises the wisdom of Avalokiteshvara's words, and it is recorded that the whole company rejoiced, it is clear that there is a teaching beyond cause and effect, and indeed beyond all limits, right at the heart of the Buddha's teachings themselves. Garab Dorje had many disciples both among human beings and among the Dakinis, and continued to teach for the rest of his life. Finally, before he dissolved his body into the essence of the elements and entered into the realization of the body of light, he left the summary of his teachings, known as the Three Principles, which were presented above.